Desperation had driven her here to walls of slick black stone that rose like a warning against the sky. They were not walls meant to protect, but to imprison, as if the structure itself strained to hold back something too dreadful to be loosed. Even the sun seemed reluctant, its light falling weak and gray, paling before the fortress that denied warmth. Melody walked the rest of the way after the cab refused to travel further, the driver's face paling at the very mention of the address. Her shoes crunched against gravel as she approached the wrought iron gate, its spires ending in cruel barbs that twisted like spears. Vines, skeletal and thorned, gripped the stone walls as if in desperate plea to escape the very thing they clung to. The gate loomed before her, a monstrous beauty, towering, elegant, merciless. It guarded the castle beyond, a structure of impossible endurance, as though carved from the earth's bones and set against the march of time. Towers stabbed upward, jagged silhouettes that seemed to scrape against the very heavens. Windows glared down at her, narrow and unblinking, reflecting no light, only watching. This was the last place she would ever have chosen, and yet she had no choice. Jobs were gone. Bills rose, debt pressed like chains around her neck, and so desperation, that cruelest of masters, had dragged her to this place. The ad had been strange, an ornate poster styled as though it had slipped through time, shared online with nothing but an address and the promise of generous pay. She had laughed at first, thinking it an elaborate joke or worse, a trap. But curiosity had gnawed at her. Then she'd seen the comments, thousands of them. Some ridiculed the idea, others whispered warnings, of voices in the halls, of shadows that moved of their own accord, of nights spent listening to whispers until sanity cracked. Most who entered did not stay, and yet the money, the promise of relief, even as dread ate at her resolve, even as the comments clung like cobwebs in her mind, she forced her feet forward. The gate shrieked open on its own accord, its hinges screaming like something long starved. A chill gust rolled out as though the castle had exhaled in welcome or warning. Swallowing hard, Melody stepped through, her gaze catching on the courtyard within. Statues stood at every corner, stone figures weathered by age. Their faces were obscured, features smoothed into anonymity by time or by something less natural, their headless silhouettes framed by hedges heavy with black peonies that seemed to drink the color from the air. She shivered. The place was beautiful, yes, but beautiful like a knife laid against the throat. Her thoughts betrayed her then. Was she walking into her own fairy tale, Beauty and the Beast, or merely toward her own monster? The door loomed before her, immense oak reinforced with blackened iron. Its knocker was no cherub, no harmless adornment, but a ferocious lion, its mane wild, its eyes carved sharp and predatory. With trembling fingers she lifted it and let the sound echo, low and heavy, like the tolling of some funeral bell. The door opened without a sound. Melody gasped softly. The foyer yawned before her, gilded, immense, a cavern of books and shadow. Everything smelled faintly of dust, ink, and something metallic. The air itself seemed weighted, as if centuries of thought and blood had seeped into the stone. It did not welcome, it demanded. And somewhere she knew, the master of this house was already watching. She could feel it, like sunlight that lingered too long on bare skin, at first a warmth, then a slow, searing burn. Hello? Melody's voice trembled against the hush, swallowed by the vaulted foyer. She shivered, startled by the sudden drop in temperature, as though she had stepped into a breath held for centuries. Her gaze roamed the shadows, searching for a face, anyone at all who might greet her with the cordial warmth of an interview. Instead, a voice broke the silence. Are you perchance here for the maid's position? The words rolled deep and resonant, aristocratic, deliberate, a voice that commanded silence before it was even finished speaking. It carried none of the nervous humor she hoped for, only the precise diction of someone used to obedience. Yes, I am, she answered, forcing steadiness into her tone as her eyes darted to find the source. He emerged not from a doorway, but from shadow itself, as if he had been painted there all along and only now chose to step out. A tall figure, pale and severe, features cut sharp in half-light. His eyes, dark, electric, merciless, pinned her where she stood. The rest of him seemed half concealed, like the outline of a nightmare one can't fully remember upon waking. "It is yours," he intoned, "if you can comply with my rules." She swallowed, throat suddenly dry. 1. You must be within your chamber by midnight and remain there until dawn. 2. The West Wing is forbidden. Step beyond its doors, and your employment, your stay here, will end instantly. 3. No visitors are to set foot upon my property. None, ever. And lastly, his voice slowed here, deliberate, each syllable weighted with some private amusement. On the 15th day of every month you will depart. Leave this house entirely for 24 hours. You will return only at sunset the following day. Melody blinked. It was a list too strange to be real, rules that sounded less like housework and more like some grim fairy tale bargain. Trying to break the tension, she muttered under her breath, "Aye, Captain." His eyes narrowed to slits, and in that instant she knew jesting with him was dangerous. Her breath caught. "If you are in agreement," he said coldly, "sign the contract waiting for you by the door." Her head turned automatically and froze. She could have sworn no table had stood there when she entered. Yet now, just within reach, stood an ornate writing desk, its legs sculpted into writhing pixies whose painted faces grinned in grotesque delight. Upon it lay a parchment thick with age, a quill of dark feather bound in silver filigree, and an ink pot brimming with crimson liquid that shimmered too thickly to be mere ink. A ripple of unease slid through her as she approached. She lifted the contract, eyes scanning its contents. It read like any standard agreement, duties, payment, lodging, but beneath the formal words lurked an unspoken weight. Certain clauses repeated themselves, circling back to her confinement after dark, her isolation, her obedience. She read it twice, then a third time, certain she must be missing something, but the words remained maddeningly mundane. Her pulse hammered as she dipped the jeweled quill into the ink. The fluid clung to the nib like syrup. She brushed off the excess, then signed her name. The parchment seemed to drink her signature eagerly, and at once a wave of unnatural warmth rushed over her, colliding with a sharp cold that left her skin prickling. Something deep inside recoiled, as though she had signed away more than her name. "Ascend the staircase," came the command, smooth as velvet, immovable as stone. "I will show you to your room." She obeyed, hand trailing the cold stone banister as her eyes drank in every detail of the walls. Arched windows swallowing daylight whole, oil paintings of long-dead nobles whose eyes seemed to follow her ascent. Yet the higher she climbed, the more impossible the house became. Corridors stretched longer than they had appeared below, staircases twisted higher than the towers suggested from outside. It was as though the house itself expanded around her, drawing her deeper into its labyrinth. The master followed, but never nearer than 10 feet. No matter how she slowed or quickened her steps, the distance between them remained eerily constant, as though space itself bent to preserve it. She dared glance back once, and his silhouette lingered there, dark against darker shadow, watching her without a sound. At the top, a door already stood ajar, its brass handle gleaming faintly. "This," he said, his voice curling through the space like smoke, "is your room." Melody stepped inside and caught her breath. It was a chamber fit for royalty, heavy velvet curtains, black and gold damask papering the walls, shelves burdened with tomes, a fireplace crowned with carved angels whose faces were weary and solemn, and above the mantel hung a portrait, a man of regal bearing, clad in the attire of a duke. His features were hauntingly familiar, chiseled and beautiful, eerily reminiscent of Henry Cavill, but his painted eyes glowed with the same merciless intensity as the master who now lingered in the hall. Her skin crawled. It was as though the portrait were not a likeness of her employer, but an echo of him, an echo across centuries. Turning to the door with a polite smile, ready to thank her new employer, Melody's expression faltered. The corridor beyond lay in muted half-light, stretching long and empty, and nothing but silence returned her glance. No footsteps, no retreating figure, only the faint sigh of the house like a slumbering beast. She poked her head into the hall, scanning both ends, but found no one, only the cold hush and the faint echo of her own heartbeat. Drawing back inside, she shut the door softly, fingers lingering on the handle as unease coiled in her stomach. What exactly had she walked into? Clearly he had no desire for conversation beyond business, but the abruptness of his disappearance left her unsettled. With dusk pressing against the windows, sunlight thinning, devoured by a creeping horizon, she busied herself exploring the room. The ensuite bathroom startled her, gleaming modern fixtures in stark contrast to the ancient air of the castle. Marble counters, polished chrome, and a tub deep enough to drown in. She stripped her outer layers almost without thought, fetching her body scrub with a relieved little laugh. Then froze. On the bed lay a note that had not been there before. Start with the library, recategorize every shelf. Her heart jolted painfully. She hadn't heard the door creak. She was certain no one had entered. The paper was heavy ivory stock, ink curling in a hand, elegant and old-fashioned. A wave of paranoia washed over her. Were there secret passages? Was someone watching her even now? The notion of being under a roof with a creep flashed through her mind, but the master of the house didn't feel like a creep. He felt like something far worse, someone so powerful they didn't need to creep at all. The rushing water from the tub dragged her back, but even as she adjusted the faucet, she gnawed her lower lip, her mind racing. Locking the bathroom door behind her, she lowered herself into the bath anyway, the hot watermelon tree-scented water rising to her collarbone. Groaning softly as her muscles loosened, her travel-weary body threatened to betray her with sleep. She stayed until the water cooled, until her fingers wrinkled pale and lifeless. Rising, she wrapped herself in a towel and stepped back into the room, only to stop dead. The fireplace blazed with a steady glow. Brows knitted, Melody moved closer. She had not lit it, no switch, no kindling in sight. It burned with the calm certainty of something that had always been burning, flames licking low and red, casting tall shadows across the walls. A pulse of dread fluttered under her ribs. Was it automatic? Okay. Calm down, she told herself, but her voice inside felt small. Each new oddity chipped at her composure, making her feel unmoored, as though she were walking deeper into someone else's dream. She dressed quickly, chastened, then opened her laptop to revisit the job posting. Scrolling through the comments with sharpened focus, she searched for someone, anyone, describing what she was experiencing. Her stomach dropped when she found one. I think the pay is so high because the weird stuff keeps happening. I felt like I was losing my mind, things moving and appearing, noises at night. Melody's eyes narrowed at the username and she sent a message immediately, desperate for a reply. She waited and waited, nerves thrumming, until at last she sank beneath the covers, still scrolling through videos on game releases. She didn't know when sleep came for her, only that it pulled her down like velvet water, lids heavy, consciousness slipping. And then she was walking through a field of wildflowers. The colors were too vivid, her senses flared with impossible clarity. She could taste the sweetness of pollen on the air, hear each stalk brush against the next, feel the brush of petals against her calves. Ahead, the field sloped upwards toward a single tree, impossibly tall, impossibly old, its bark ridged and silvered like ancient bones. The wind combed through its leaves, setting them whispering in a language she almost understood. Beneath it sat a man. His hair flickered in the wind, dark strands veiling his face. The closer she drew, the hazier he became, his outline blurred, as though the dream itself rebelled against revealing him. Yet her pulse leapt wildly, some deep part of her straining toward him, a recognition she couldn't name. "So you have come to see me in this wretched state?" His voice was low, magnetic, carrying a sorrow that snagged at her heart. She hesitated, hand lifting despite herself. "I have not done what they have said," he went on, tone ruffling. "But you do not believe me. How cold you grew when the first test of our love came." A bitter laugh broke from him, his shoulders tight with old tension. She stepped closer, but the more she tried, the more his face pixelated into obscurity, like a painting smeared under water. Her own breath quickened. The ache in her chest was unbearable, like longing for someone she had never met. "Remember," he hissed, voice sharpening like a blade, "you cursed me to this fate, Lyra. You abandoned me." His shout cracked the air, acrid and bitter with vengeance, and she froze. His frame seemed to shrink and retreat even as his presence pressed heavier against her, like the rush of a storm about to break. Melody stood rooted, the wildflowers around her bowing under a sudden, unseen wind. The trees' leaves rattled like bones. The world smelled of iron and thunder. A blaring alarm from her phone jolted Melody awake. Groaning, she fumbled clumsily at the screen, silencing it only after her fifth attempt. She lay back a moment, chest rising and falling before dragging herself into the bathroom to begin the ritual of preparing for the day. By the time she was satisfied with her hygiene, another missive awaited outside her door. Neat, deliberate handwriting directed her toward the kitchen and library. Her steps carried her first to the stone, colonial-style kitchen, its hearth still cool from the night. She gathered simple ingredients and prepared a modest breakfast of fried bake, sausage, eggs, and vegetables. From her pocket she drew a small pouch of herbal teas, her own comfort, and slipped a bag into steaming water. The fragrant steam curled up, comforting, while she ate fluffy eggs at her own pace. Grateful for the 40 quiet minutes to eat and clean, Melody finished her meal, washed the dishes, and allowed herself a small smile. For an instant she felt light enough to dash through the corridors like a besotted princess, fresh from a forbidden rendezvous. But the grand arching doors of the library waited. Crafted in a lavish Art Deco style, they loomed like a portal to some older world. With a short grunt she pushed open, only to scream as a flurry of bats burst outward, wings slicing the air. They darted past her in a chaotic swarm before vanishing around the corner. Heart pounding, she pressed a hand to her chest and forced herself to breathe. Then, swallowing hard, she stepped inside. The air was cool, tinged with dust and something more. Ozone, perhaps, or the mineral tang of stone freshly split. Shadows pressed close, but a switch by the door glowed faintly. She flicked it and light flooded the chamber. Her gasp echoed across the vast hall. This was no ordinary library. The ceiling arched high like the ribs of a mountain, buttressed by dark beams carved with ancient motifs. Columns rose like tree trunks etched with runes whose grooves caught the light. The place felt less like a library and more like a dwarven hall out of some myth, ageless and solemn. Books were everywhere, piled in crooked stacks beneath tables, leaning drunkenly against shelves that climbed far beyond the reach of ladders, scattered on the flagstone floor, as though abandoned mid-thought by scholars long gone.